The Legend of Zelda has been around for a long time, and yet it is very rare that you actually get to play as the titular character of Princess Zelda. Outside those not so great CDI games from years back, you typically only get to play as Zelda in spin-off or crossover games, like Hyrule Warriors or Super Smash Bros. But that recently changed. We just got the first new top-down Zelda in over a decade, and the first that has Princess Zelda as its main playable protag. So let's dive into a classic-style Zelda with a lot of twists and turns. Here is my review of The Legend of Zelda: Echoes of Wisdom for the Nintendo Switch. This game's story starts with Princess Zelda being rescued by Link, only for Link to fall into a dimensional rift, and Hyrule Castle's leadership replaced by imposters that want the princess to be executed. With the help of a floating being named Tri, Zelda escapes from the castle and ventures out into Hyrule, aiming to mend the rifts that has taken those people and restore them. Overall, I'd say the story is good. You visit all the normal tribes of Zelda lore, and most of them have nice little story arcs, especially the two different tribes of Zora showing up in one game with conflicting ideas. It's also interesting that some bits of lore have been thrown in for normal Zelda things you just kind of assume. This game actually gives an in-lore reason for why the Link that shows up in this game is mute and cannot speak. When it comes to gameplay, this is an open-world action-adventure game with heavy puzzle elements thrown in. As you play, you'll explore a large open map, explore dungeons, and fight off enemies with a plethora of summoning abilities. The first thing to note here is that this is very classic Zelda-like, but it's also got some modern Zelda thrown in. The perspective is top-down, and it plays much like the Link's Awakening remake, with the normal top-down exploration and side-scrolling underground segments. All of the dungeons also feel very classic Zelda, with square rooms that you go through, small keys and big keys to open doors. The main difference is the fact that you can jump all of the time without an item, and this game has a lot more platforming. Then as far as modern elements thrown in, we have fast travel points you can unlock on the map, and a very Breath of the Wild-esque UI design in the little moblin camps where you have to fight all the enemies in an area to unlock the chest. It's also got a smoothie shop system where you combine materials into smoothies to heal you, give you energy, and various buffs like lower damage or chill resistance. Very similar to the cooked meals from Breath of the Wild. Plus, this game has a true open world feeling to its map. Once you clear the first dungeon, you have access to the entire map and can go anywhere you want. There aren't any regions blocked off by traversal items from dungeons. You can just go wherever for fast travel points, unlocking horses, side missions, pieces of heart, and the list goes on. Now, we've covered that basic progression like wandering around and going through dungeons is very classic Zelda feeling, but the ecosystem can make it feel very different at the same time. In this game, Zelda can copy items or monsters she finds and turn them into echoes that she can summon anywhere she wants, anytime she wants. You can grab things like tables, blocks, trampolines, beds, clouds, and more that'll help you move around the world and get past large gaps. Much more interesting, however, is the fact that you can echo monsters that you fight. Pretty much anything you defeat that isn't a boss, you can copy and summon later to have fight for you instead of against you, including some of these pseudo-boss enemies like Wizrobes and the Lionel. But getting back to the item echoes, those are heavily used in dungeons as well. Like with previous games of the series, every dungeon has a sort of gimmick to it, but instead of finding a key item in the dungeon for those puzzles, like a boomerang or hookshot, you use echoes you gained in that dungeon's region to solve the puzzles. And really, puzzles are the big thing here. From the moment I started using the echo system in this game, I could tell that this was clearly, hey, let's take the puzzle element of Zelda and make an entire game that really focuses on that. Even combat in this game feels like a puzzle with trying to figure out what echoes to use against the enemies that you're fighting. It is true that you get a sword fighter form early in the game and upgradable versions of Link's sword, bow, shield, and bombs. You get limited energy with that form, and most of the combat you're going to do until the late game is going to mostly be comprised of copying enemies you encounter and summoning them to fight for you. And there's something charming about that. Not just summoning big monsters to fight, but getting through a tough encounter and using that enemy you had so many problems with to recreate those problems for anything that you encounter in the future. The game's also got a bit of that figure out your own way to do this with the echo system. Most obstacles can be cleared in multiple ways with different echoes. What I do to get through a section might not be what you do. And it helps you think when you realize the normal limitations of traversal no longer matter. Trees aren't an impassable barrier anymore. You just summon water blocks and cut your way across the top of them. You can't break this game in the same way you can Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom, but there is definitely an element of there are a lot of different ways to do this, let's just figure out which one works for me. But this is not the perfect gameplay system. It's a lot of fun, but there are two parts of this game I didn't really like. The first is the user interface for echoes. You can obtain almost 130 different echoes in this game, and many situations call for specific echoes. You don't really get categories, so every time you go in to change, you have to cycle through all of them until you find the one that you need. Eventually, you can set it to most used, and a lot of echoes will just be there at the top because you use them so often, or because you decide you really want to use something a lot, so you stand in one spot and mash the Y button until you've used it enough for it to be up there. Overall though, it can be pretty repetitive to cycle through all the echoes. The second nitpick I have is the difficulty. I think the game's a bit too easy overall. I didn't really have any issues in normal mode until the very end of the game, and there is an overall just lack of punishment for other things. Like Skyward Sword before it, you do not take damage for falling into pits even in hero mode. And hero mode kinda does the opposite, the double damage making things a bit too extreme, having boss fights less than halfway through the game one-shotting you. As all of these gameplay mechanics come together, I think this game is a ton of fun, especially with the creative side of you just wandering around and doing side quests while using a lot of echoes that you probably don't need to use but can anyways. I had so much fun doing things on the side, I kept putting the game's finale off to get all of the rifts and other side missions done. Speaking of, let's dive into content and length. There's a pretty decent adventure in here. I admittedly did do a lot of the side quests, got all the optional rifts done, unlocked Green Tunic, got most of the other costumes, and I finished the game after playing for around 25 hours. Without a lot of that side content, you could probably manage a playthrough in about 18 to 20 hours. Next up is presentation. Visually, the game looks colorful and pretty. It uses the chibi toy-like design from the Link's Awakening remake, and everything looks very good. Lots of movement in the environment, and the models don't have many jagged edges. There's also very little visual difference between docked mode here and handheld mode here. The depth of field blurring from Link's Awakening did come back, but it's much less pronounced. It's pretty much only on the world map and is more vertical than horizontal, when you're standing on a high platform and things below are blurred. Then there's performance, which is a little bit weird. A lot of people online are talking about how terrible and awful the performance is for this game, but it all depends on what you want. This game runs at 60 FPS when it can, and otherwise jumps between 30 and 60. While the jumps do cause a stuttering effect to happen, it's worth noting that it never drops below 30 FPS. Sure, it's inconsistent and would have benefited from a mode to lock it at 30, but to be honest, the more I played, the less it bothered me. That brings us to battery life. On the original and light models, Zelda Echoes of Wisdom will give a battery range of about 3 to 4.5 hours, while the V2 and OLED models get 5.5 to 6 hours. In conclusion, Echoes of Wisdom is the first new top-down Zelda in over a decade and the first official game that stars the actual character of Zelda in a Zelda game. Now, the downside, the difficulty is either too easy or too hard. Cycling through Echoes can be repetitive and the frame rate is a bit inconsistent. But this is still a very charming adventure that has classic Zelda, but throws the formula upside down with Echoes, and is just a fun little adventure game. Reviews to Go rates The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom for the Nintendo Switch an 8.5 out of 10. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.